Iran just made a move that shocked the entire Middle East, and Trump's response sent chills through every world capital watching this unfold. This is not a drill. This is not political noise. What is happening right now between the United States and Iran could reshape the entire global order, and most people are only seeing the surface of it. Let's get into what is really going on here, because there is so much more beneath these headlines than what is being reported. President Donald Trump, fresh off a high-stakes trip to the Middle East, sat down for a brief but absolutely jaw-dropping phone interview with the New York Post on Monday. And what he said, or more importantly, what he refused to say, told us everything. When asked directly about Iran's latest offer for diplomatic talks, Trump's answer was short, blunt, and loaded with meaning. He said, "I'm not open to anything right now." 4 words that just slammed the door on what many thought could be a path toward peace. But here is where things get really interesting. Trump then looked at the camera, figuratively speaking, and said something that should have every foreign policy analyst, every diplomat, and every world leader paying very close attention. He said Iran knows what's going to be happening soon. Let that sink in for a moment. The President of the United States, when asked about a nuclear deal with one of the most volatile nations on earth, did not talk about negotiations. He did not talk about compromise. He said Iran already knows what is coming. That is not the language of a man who is sitting at a negotiating table. That is the language of a man who has already made up his mind. Now, to understand why this moment is so critical, we need to back up and look at the full picture, because this story did not start on Monday. This has been building for weeks, and the pressure cooker is now at its absolute limit. Let's break this down from the beginning. Earlier this month, Trump had made what many saw as a significant olive branch toward Tehran. He signaled publicly that he would be willing to accept a 20-year moratorium on Iranian uranium enrichment. Think about what that means, a 20-year moratorium. That is 2 decades where Iran would agree to pause its nuclear ambitions in exchange for relief, likely sanctions relief, economic normalization, some form of diplomatic recognition. That is not a small offer. That is a major concession, and it came directly from Trump himself. So what did Iran do with it? Iran came back with what sources are describing as a disappointing response. The details of exactly what Tehran offered have not been fully made public. But the fact that Trump, who prides himself on deal-making more than almost anything else, came out and said he is not open to anything right now, tells you everything about how that Iranian response landed in Washington. It did not land well. Not land. And now we are in genuinely uncharted territory. Here is what most people missed in this story. While the headlines focused on Trump's comments, there was another piece of information buried in the reporting that deserves serious attention. Regional sources, people with knowledge of the situation on the ground in the Middle East, are claiming that Iran is trying to wait out Washington, that Iran's strategy is not to deal, not to negotiate in good faith, but simply to delay, to run out the clock, to bet that American political pressure, domestic distractions, or international dynamics will eventually force the United States to soften its position. When Trump was asked directly about this, about whether Iran is trying to wait him out on both the nuclear issue and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, his answer was telling. He said he hadn't heard that. He said, "I'm not hearing anything," but then he added something that reveals his mindset completely. He said, "It's a negotiation. I don't want to be stupid." That phrase, "I don't want to be stupid," is Trump speaking in a very specific way. He is saying he knows the game. He knows what is being played. He is not going to tip his hand. He is not going to give Iran a roadmap to his thinking. He is not going to make the same mistakes he believes previous administrations made. And that is exactly why what comes next is so significant. Because here is the thing about Trump's negotiating style, and if you have watched him operate for the past decade, you know this pattern very well. Trump does not threaten loudly when he is bluffing. Trump goes quiet when things are about to get very serious. And right now, Donald Trump has gone quiet on Iran in a way that should make everyone in Tehran and everyone watching from Beijing, from Moscow, from Riyadh, extremely nervous. Now let's talk about what was happening behind the scenes this past weekend, because this is where the real story lives. After returning from his trip, which included major stops and conversations with some of the most important leaders in the region, Trump did not take the weekend off. He spent it huddled with his national security team at his Virginia Golf Club, not relaxing, not vacationing, planning, strategizing, plotting next steps on Iran. Think about the weight of that image. The President of the United States, surrounded by his top security advisors on a weekend, going through options on one of the most dangerous geopolitical situations in decades. That is not the behavior of an administration that is preparing to walk away from pressure. That is the behavior of an administration that is preparing to escalate. And it is not just Trump making this calculation on his own. Some of the most hawkish voices in the Republican Party, people who have long believed that diplomacy with Iran is a dead end, are now actively pushing the president to move beyond talks. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, one of Trump's closest allies and one of the Senate's most aggressive voices on foreign policy, is reportedly urging the administration to resume military operations against Iran as diplomatic efforts stall. Military operations. Let that land for a second. We are not talking about tougher sanctions. We are not talking about more strongly worded statements. We are talking about a sitting United States senator, a close ally of the president, pushing for military action against Iran. And Trump, who has historically been more cautious than many of his hawkish allies when it comes to actually committing troops and resources to conflicts, is now sitting in meetings where this is being seriously discussed. More meetings are expected on Tuesday. The decisions being made in those rooms could echo for decades. Now, here is a question worth sitting with for a moment. Why is this happening now? Why is the pressure building to this particular breaking point at this particular moment in time? The answer has several layers, and they are all connected. First, there is the nuclear timeline. Intelligence assessments have consistently shown that Iran's nuclear program has been advancing. Every month that passes without a deal is potentially a month closer to Iran reaching a threshold that changes the calculus entirely for Israel, for Saudi Arabia, for the United States. The window for a negotiated solution that keeps Iran from a nuclear weapon is not infinite, and every side knows that. Second, there is the Strait of Hormuz. This is one of the most strategically critical waterways on the entire planet. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through it. If Iran were to fully close or significantly restrict traffic through the strait, something it has threatened before and has the capability to disrupt, the economic consequences would ripple across every major economy on Earth. Gas prices, supply chains, global markets, everything connected to oil would feel it immediately. And Iran has been dangling this threat, using it as leverage in negotiations. Third, and perhaps most importantly right now, there is Trump himself. The president is operating in a specific political and historical moment. He knows that his time in office is not unlimited. He has made big promises about what he would accomplish, and the Iran nuclear issue is one of the defining foreign policy challenges of his administration. He does not want to leave office having kicked this problem down the road. He wants a resolution, either a deal on his terms or a decisive change in Iran's capabilities. That combination, nuclear timeline pressure, Strait of Hormuz leverage, and presidential urgency, is what is driving this moment to its current intensity. And Iran is reading all of this too. Here is something important to understand about how Tehran operates. Iran's leadership has survived decades of sanctions, isolation, internal pressure, and external threats. They are not naive actors. They understand geopolitics. They have outlasted multiple American administrations. And their calculation right now appears to be that they can find a more favorable deal by waiting, by testing Trump's patience, by offering just enough to keep talks alive without actually conceding anything of substance. But that calculation may be badly wrong, because what makes this moment different from previous standoffs is the combination of factors converging simultaneously. You have an American president who has already authorized significant pressure on Iran and who is getting advice from people who want to go further. You have regional allies, including Israel and Gulf states, who have their own red lines on the Iranian nuclear question and who are watching American resolve very carefully. And you have an Iranian regime that is under significant internal economic stress from years of sanctions and that cannot afford a prolonged military confrontation. When Trump says Iran knows what's going to be happening soon, he is not speaking into a void. He is sending a message that is being received in Tehran, that is being analyzed in every major capital in the world. And that reflects a very real set of options that the United States has at its disposal. Those options range from intensified sanctions, what some are calling a maximum pressure 2.0 campaign, to targeted military strikes on Iranian nuclear or military facilities, to full-scale military operations in coordination with regional partners. None of these options are simple. None of them are without risk. And the people in those rooms at Trump's golf club this weekend know that better than anyone. But the signal that came out of Monday's phone call with the Post is unmistakable. The diplomatic window that existed just days ago, when Trump was willing to talk about a 20-year enrichment moratorium, appears to have closed. Not forever, perhaps, but for now. And in the world of high-stakes geopolitics, for now can change everything. There is one more piece of this story that deserves attention before we get to the bigger picture. The White House did not respond to questions about the United States' official response to Iran's latest offer. That silence, that official, deliberate silence, is itself a statement. When an administration wants to signal openness to dialogue, they talk. They send out officials to give background briefings. They leak optimistic quotes to friendly reporters. None of that happened here. Instead, there was silence from the White House and a blunt, brief phone call from the president himself that offered very little comfort to anyone hoping for a diplomatic breakthrough. That is a posture. That is a deliberate posture. And it is telling us something important about where this is headed. Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because what is happening between the United States and Iran does not exist in isolation. It is connected to everything else that is reshaping the global order right now. China is watching. Beijing has significant economic relationships with Tehran and has positioned itself as a potential mediator. Any American military action against Iran would directly impact Chinese interests and would add another layer of complexity to the already tense U.S.-China relationship. Russia is watching. Moscow has its own complicated relationship with Iran, including arms deals and shared interests in opposing American influence in the region. How Russia responds to any escalation would have significant implications for the broader global balance of power. Israel is watching very closely. The Israeli government has been one of the most vocal about the threat posed by an Iranian nuclear weapon, and Israeli leaders have not ruled out unilateral military action if they believe the threat becomes imminent. American signals matter enormously in whether Israel acts independently or in coordination with Washington. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are watching. These countries live in the shadow of Iranian influence in the region, and they have their own reasons for wanting a resolution, whether diplomatic or otherwise, to the Iranian nuclear question. And the American public is watching, or at least the part of the American public that is paying attention to foreign policy, which is increasingly aware that the decisions being made in the next few weeks could have enormous consequences. This is the moment. This is the inflection point. What happens between the United States and Iran in the coming days and weeks will be studied by historians for decades. It will define the legacy of this administration's foreign policy. It will shape the security architecture of the Middle East. And it will send a signal to every nation watching, from North Korea to Venezuela to Russia, about how the United States responds when diplomacy fails and options run out. Trump said Iran knows what is going to be happening soon. He knows, they know. The world is watching. So here is the question that is sitting at the center of all of this, the question that does not have an easy answer, and that every foreign policy analyst, every diplomat, and every ordinary citizen paying attention to these events is grappling with right now. Can a last-minute deal still happen? Is there a version of events where Iran blinks, where Tehran comes back with an offer serious enough to reopen the door that appeared to close on Monday? Or are we watching the final hours of diplomacy before something much more consequential begins? And if it does escalate, if the what's going to be happening soon that Trump referenced turns out to be something that changes the situation fundamentally, are we as a country and as a world prepared for what comes after? Those are not rhetorical questions. They are the real questions of this moment. And how they get answered in those rooms in Washington, in the halls of power in Tehran, in the conversations happening right now between world leaders, will determine a great deal about what the next chapter of this story looks like. So the real question now is, when Trump says Iran knows what's coming, do you think diplomacy still has a chance? Or has that window already closed for good?